welcome to the Deep Dive Podcast channel.
Great to be here.
Today we're tackling something that I think really touches every part of our lives, making real, lasting changes. We all have those things we'd like to shift, maybe habits we want to build or break. But why is it sometimes, even when we really want it, those changes just don't seem to, well, stick?
It's a fundamental human challenge, isn't it? And we've been looking into pretty fascinating ideas around how transformation actually happens, what really works kind of beneath the surface.
Exactly. And if this sort of exploration, understanding ourselves and how we evolve resonates with you listening, we'd absolutely love you to subscribe to the channel. We want to have more of these in-depth discussions.
And we hope this feels like a space where you can, explore these ideas openly, no pressure at all.
Yeah, absolutely no pressure. Just a chance to maybe learn something or see things from a new angle. And hey, if anything we chat about sparks a thought or a question for you, please share it in the comments. We really do value that engagement.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's get into our discussion on the psychology of lasting behavior change. Where should we start? Maybe with the idea that big changes don't always need big actions.
That's a perfect starting point. It's quite counterintuitive, isn't it? We often think big goal, need a massive overhaul.
Right, like a total life reset.
Exactly. But the evidence really points towards the power of the small. Think about something really mundane like brushing your teeth.
Okay.
It's a tiny habit, right? Takes maybe 2 minutes, but done consistently twice a day, year after year, the impact on your long-term dental health is enormous.
That's a great example. Or like deciding to read just, say, 2 pages of a book each night.
Precisely. It feels almost insignificant in the moment. You might think, what's the point? But compound that over a year or 5 years, you've suddenly read dozens of books, accumulated a huge amount of knowledge.
So the real question becomes, what makes those tiny, consistent actions actually stick?
Right.
Why do they become automatic while other things we try just fizzle out?
That's the core puzzle.
Yeah.
And it often leads people down the wrong path, I think.
How so?
Well, it's so easy to blame ourselves, isn't it? When we struggle, we think, oh, I just don't have enough willpower, or I'm not motivated enough.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. The self-blame spiral.
Right. But the material we've been exploring suggests maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't us. Fundamentally, maybe it's the approach we're taking.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the alternative then?
It really highlights this shift towards focusing on systems rather than just relying on willpower or motivation alone.
Systems.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a bit? What does that mean in practical terms?
Sure. Think of willpower as like a muscle. It gets tired. You can't just rely on flexing it constantly, especially when you're stressed or depleted.
Makes sense. Some days you have it, some days you really don't.
Exactly. So instead of depending solely on this, well, finite inner drive, the idea is to build effective systems. These are the repeatable daily frameworks, the routines and structures we put in place that basically shape our outcomes almost automatically.
Okay. So it's less about heroic effort and more about smart design.
Precisely. There's a quote that really captures this. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems.
Ooh, I like that. You fall to the level of your systems.
It implies our default behaviors are dictated by these underlying structures.
Exactly. Our consistent habits, our processes, they're much stronger predictors of where we'll end up than just our lofty aspirations.
Okay, so let's make that concrete. If I want to, say, eat healthier, instead of just willing myself to avoid junk food.
Right. The systems approach would be things like planning your meals for the week ahead.
Okay.
Maybe doing some food prep on Sunday, keeping healthy snacks like fruit or nuts visible and easily accessible, while hiding the biscuits or not buying them at all.
So you're making the good choice the easy choice, reducing the friction.
You got it. It's about building those small, repeatable actions that make the desired behavior the path of least resistance. And this ties directly into another really powerful concept, identity-based change. Yes. This was the part that really kind of shifted my perspective when I was reading about it. It's not just about the what, but the who.
Exactly. It flips the script. Instead of focusing solely on the external result, I want to lose 10 pounds or I want to write a novel, you focus on becoming a different kind of person.
So instead of I want to lose weight, it's more like I am the kind of person who moves my body daily. Or I am someone who values nourishing my body.
Precisely that. Or instead of I want to write a book, it's I am a writer.
How does that shift actually help make the change stick, though? It sounds good, but what's the mechanism?
It creates a powerful, self-reinforcing feedback loop. When your identity is tied to the behavior becomes an affirmation of who you are.
Okay.
So if your goal is just, say, running a marathon, that's an external outcome. Once you cross the finish line, what happens then? The motivation might disappear.
Right, you achieve the thing.
But if you see yourself as a runner, then going for a run isn't just training for an event, it's an expression of your identity. It's what runners do.
So the behavior itself reinforces the identity, and the identity motivates the behavior.
Exactly. It becomes less about achieving a result and more about living in alignment with who you believe yourself to be. When faced with a choice, skip the workout or go, it's framed as, what would a healthy person do? Or what would a writer do?
That feels much more intrinsic, more sustainable than just chasing an external goal. It makes the daily actions feel more meaningful, perhaps.
Absolutely. They become votes for the type of person you want to be. Now, to understand how these behaviors become so ingrained, we need to look at the actual mechanics, the habit loop.
Right, the nuts and bolts. I found this fascinating. It breaks down how habits actually function in our brains. Can you walk us through those stages?
Sure. So the habit loop is essentially the neurological pathway behind every habit we have, good or bad. It's a four-step process.
Forceps.
First, there's a cue. This is the trigger, something in your environment or an internal feeling that signals your brain to initiate a behavior because a reward might be available.
Like seeing a notification pop up on your phone.
Perfect example. That visual or auditory alert is the cue. Second comes the craving. The cue triggers this motivational urge, this desire to change your current state. You crave the information, the connection, the dopamine hit associated with checking that notification.
Okay, cue, then craving.
Third is the response. This is the actual habit itself, the action you take. So picking up the phone, opening the app, scrolling.
Got it.
And finally, fourth is the reward. This is the positive feedback you get that satisfies the craving. It could be finding an interesting email, seeing a like on social media, or just the temporary relief from the urge itself. This reward teaches your brain that the loop is worth remembering and repeating.
Cue, craving, response, reward. And this loop just runs automatically most of the time.
Very much so. For established habits, it's almost subconscious. But the crucial insight here isn't just knowing the steps, it's realizing that we can actually intervene at each point.
Yeah.
We can change the cue, manage the craving, alter the response, or adjust the reward to consciously reshape our habits.
So it gives us levers to pull, basically.
Right.
Instead of feeling controlled by our habits, we can start to understand and maybe redirect them.
Precisely. Understanding the loop is the first step towards changing it.
Could we maybe use another example, like maybe a less tech-focused one?
Sure. Think about feeling stressed. That feeling, maybe tightness in your chest, could be the cue.
Okay.
The craving might be for relief, for comfort. The automatic response might be reaching for sugary snacks or pouring a drink.
Right, the go-to coping mechanism.
And the reward is that temporary feeling of comfort or distraction, even if it's followed by guilt later. By recognizing that loop stress cues, craving for comfort, leads to eating junk food, leads to temporary relief, you can start to think, okay, how can I get that comfort reward differently? Maybe the response becomes deep breathing or calling a friend or going for a short walk.
Finding a healthier response to satisfy the same underlying craving triggered by the same cue. That makes a lot of sense.
And that leads nicely into a very practical technique mentioned in the materials, habit stacking.
Yes. This seemed really actionable. How does habit stacking work?
It's elegantly simple, really. It leverages habits you already have. You anchor a new desired habit to an existing, well-established routine.
So you piggyback the new onto the old.
Exactly. The formula is basically, after I current habit, I will new habit.
Okay.
Because that current habit, like brushing your teeth, making coffee, taking off your shoes when you get home, is already automatic. It serves as a really reliable cue or trigger for the new habit you want to build. You don't need a separate reminder.
Can you give a couple of examples of how someone might use that?
Absolutely. Let's say you want to start meditating, but keep forgetting or putting it off. If you always have a cup of coffee first thing in the morning,
Which many of us do.
right, you could stack onto that. After I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 2 minutes. The act of pouring coffee becomes the trigger.
Okay, I like that. 2 minutes feels manageable too.
Or say you want to practice gratitude. You could stack it onto brushing your teeth. After I brush my teeth at night, I'll write down one thing I'm grateful for.
Using those existing neural pathways, sort of paving the road for the new habit.
Precisely. It just slots the new behavior into your existing flow, making it much easier to remember and execute consistently.
It lowers the barrier to entry. Now, another concept that ties into this idea of small, consistent actions is the power of 1% improvements.
Ah, yes, the compounding effect.
Right. It doesn't sound like much, does it? Getting just 1% better each day.
hmm
But apparently the long-term impact is, oh, huge.
It really is. We often overestimate the importance of one defining moment and underestimate the value of making small improvements on a daily basis. It's like compound interest for self-development.
Explain that analogy a bit more.
Well, if you get just 1% better each day for a year, you'll end up nearly 38 times better by the time you're done. Conversely, if you get 1% worse each day, you decline down to almost zero.
Wow, okay, that's a stark difference.
It illustrates how these tiny gains, or tiny losses, aggregate over time. A small habit, reading 1 page, doing 5 push-ups, writing 50 words, might seem insignificant on any given day. But the cumulative effect of sticking with it is truly remarkable.
So it's about the trajectory, not necessarily the immediate result. Those small positive habits put you on a path to significant progress, even if it doesn't feel like it day to day.
Exactly. It's a reminder that progress doesn't have to be dramatic to be incredibly effective over the long haul. Consistency trumps intensity.
That's actually quite encouraging. It feels less daunting than thinking you need to make massive leaps all the time. Small steps really do add up. And this, I imagine, connects to the importance of our surroundings, the idea of environment design.
Oh, absolutely. Our environment plays a massive, often underestimated role in shaping our behavior.
More than we realize, probably.
Definitely. Relying purely on willpower is like swimming upstream if your environment is constantly pushing you in the opposite direction. Environment design is about consciously shaping your physical and social surroundings to make the good habits the easy, obvious choice, and the bad habits harder and less appealing.
Okay, so proactively setting yourself up for success.
Yeah.
What are some practical ways we can design our environments?
Lots of ways. If you want to eat healthier, don't rely on willpower when you open the cupboard. Keep fruit in a bowl on the counter, put the healthy stuff at eye level in the fridge, and maybe hide the less healthy snacks. Or again, just don't buy them.
Make the good cues visible, the bad cues invisible.
Precisely. If you want to read more, leave a book on your pillow or on the coffee table instead of the remote control. If you want to practice guitar, take it out of the case and put it on a stand in the living room.
Reduce the friction for the desired action.
Exactly. If you want to drink more water, keep a water bottle on your desk. If you want to exercise in the morning, lay out your workout clothes the night before. It's all about making the cues for your good habits obvious, making the habits themselves attractive and easy, and ensuring they feel satisfying. And conversely, increase the friction for bad habits.
Like deleting social media apps from your phone if you want to scroll less, or leaving your credit card at home if you tend to impulse buy.
Perfect examples. Make the undesirable behavior harder to do. You're essentially making your future self's job easier.
I like that framing, setting up your environment to support your intentions. Now, something else that challenged my assumptions was the relationship between motivation and action. We usually think we need motivation first, right? Like, I'll go to the gym when I feel motivated.
The classic trap.
But the material suggests it might actually work the other way around.
That's a really critical insight for overcoming procrastination. We often wait for that wave of inspiration or motivation to hit us before we start.
Yeah, waiting to feel ready.
But the reality, quite often, is that action precedes motivation. Just starting, even in the smallest possible way, can generate the very motivation you were waiting for.
How does that work?
Well, when you take a small action, you get a small sense of accomplishment. You prove to yourself you can do it. This builds momentum. Think about going for a run. The hardest part is often just putting on your shoes and getting out the door, right?
Totally. The inertia's strong.
But once you start, even if it's just a walk, you often find you feel better, more energized, and then the motivation to keep going kicks in. The act itself fuels the desire.
So don't wait for motivation. Create it through action. Rely on your system, not just your mood.
Exactly. Building those consistent systems like we talked about and focusing on just starting maybe using something like the 2-minute rule where you just do the first 2 minutes of the habit is far more reliable than waiting to feel inspired. Momentum is your friend.
The 2-minute rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it so easy you can't say no. Like read 1 page instead of read a book, or put on running shoes instead of run 5K.
Precisely. Get the ball rolling. Action generates momentum, which generates motivation.
Okay, so we've talked systems, identity, the habit loop, environment. What about what's actually happening inside our heads? the neuroscience bit. How did the brain physically change when we form habits?
It's fascinating, really. Our brains are incredibly plastic, meaning they can change and adapt. When we repeatedly perform an action, the neural pathways associated with that action become stronger, more efficient, and more myelinated.
Myelinate.
Myelin is like an insulating sheath around nerve fibers that helps signals travel faster. So the more you practice a habit, the faster and more automatic that neural circuit becomes. It requires less conscious thought and effort over time.
So it's literally carving a path in the brain.
You could think of it that way, yes.
Yeah.
It really reinforces that idea of neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time you perform the habit, you strengthen that connection. This is why consistency is so much more important than intensity, especially early on. You need the reps to build that pathway.
So doing something small every day is better for building the actual brain structure of the habit than doing something huge once a week.
Generally, yes, especially when you're starting out. You're training the brain.
And dopamine plays a big role in this training process, right? The reward chemical.
A huge role. Dopamine is crucial for motivation, pleasure, and learning, all key components of habit formation. But here's the interesting part. Dopamine isn't just released when we get the reward.
Oh.
It's also released in anticipation of the reward. That anticipation, that spike of dopamine when the cue appears, is what drives the craving and motivates the response.
So the expectation of pleasure is a powerful driver itself.
Very powerful. And we can leverage this. We can make new positive habits more appealing and satisfying by ensuring there's some kind of immediate reward, or at least linking them to that dopamine system.
How can we do that, especially if the real reward is far off, like better health?
Good question. You can create more immediate rewards. Using a habit tracker and getting the satisfaction of checking off a box can provide a small dopamine hit.
Okay, the visual progress.
Or you could pair the habit with something you enjoy, like only listening to your favorite podcast while you exercise. This is sometimes called temptation bundling. Or simply acknowledging your effort, celebrating the small win of having done the habit can reinforce it. You're telling your brain, hey, this was good, let's do it again.
Making the process itself rewarding, not just waiting for the distant outcome.
Exactly. Make it satisfying.
Now, I know we wanted to also touch on a slightly deeper layer, potentially linking habits to past experiences or even trauma. How does that perspective fit in?
That's a really important layer to consider, because sometimes habits, especially the ones that seem self-sabotaging or particularly hard to break, aren't just about conscious choices or lack of systems. They can be deeply ingrained emotional habit loops that developed as survival strategies in response to past pain or trauma.
So things like chronic procrastination, avoidance, people-pleasing, or even certain addictive behaviors could be rooted in something deeper.
They certainly can be. For example, if someone grew up in an environment where it wasn't safe to express needs, avoidance might have become an automatic protective habit loop. Stress, Q, leads to a craving for safety and visibility, which leads to avoiding conflict or difficult tasks, response, providing temporary relief from anxiety, reward. But long term, it prevents growth and connection.
Wow, okay, so just trying to fix the behavior with willpower or habit stacking might not work if you don't address the underlying emotional driver.
It often doesn't, or it feels like constantly fighting yourself. Healing from this perspective involves acknowledging the original pain, understanding why the habit developed, recognizing it likely served a purpose at one point, and cultivating a sense of internal safety now that allows for new, healthier responses to emerge. It requires self-compassion.
That adds a whole dimension of self-compassion to the process. It's not just about optimization, but potentially about healing.
Absolutely. And this is where micro-habits can be incredibly powerful, particularly for mental well-being.
Micro-habits.
Yeah.
Even smaller than small habits.
Sometimes, yes. Think incredibly small, accessible actions. When dealing with anxiety, depression, or the aftermath of trauma, even getting out of bed can feel monumental. A micro-habit might be just sitting up, or taking one conscious deep breath when you feel overwhelmed, drinking a single glass of water upon waking.
Things that seem almost trivially small.
Exactly. But each tiny action can be a way to signal safety and self-worth to your nervous system. It's a way to gently interrupt old patterns and introduce a moment of conscious care. Consistency and compassion here are far more important than pushing oneself too hard or aiming for perfection.
It's about building trust with yourself again, perhaps. One tiny, manageable step at a time.
Beautifully put, yes. Let's look at the examples provided in the source material that illustrate this well.
Okay, yeah. There was one about shifting from reactivity to regulation.
Right. The old loop might be feel stress or criticism. Q, immediate defensive reaction or snapping response, feeling guilty or disconnected afterwards. Negative reward, but the initial reaction might feel protective.
A very common pattern for many people, I'd imagine.
Yes. The proposed new loop, built with microhabits, could be feel stress chest tightness.
Yeah.
Q. Place a hand on your heart, take one grounding breath, microhabit response. Pause, then engage in a calmer conversation. New response. Feel relief and connection. Positive reward. The microhabit is that tiny intervention, the hand on the heart, that interrupts the automatic reaction and creates space for a different choice.
Just that small physical act creates a pause. I can see how that could work. What was the other example? Shame to self-care.
Yes. The old loop. Feel insecure or not good enough. Q. Mindlessly scroll social media, comparing oneself as all response. Feel even worse. Shame spiral. Negative reward.
Another painfully familiar one.
The new loop. Feel insecure. Q. Pause, maybe acknowledge the feeling, and write down just one kind word or true statement about oneself in a journal. Microhabit response. Feel a moment of self-compassion or grounding. Positive reward. Again, the microhabit, writing one kind word, breaks the pattern and offers a different path.
It's about inserting these tiny moments of conscious choice and self-kindness into those difficult loops.
Precisely. It's gentle, accessible change.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. The power of small systems, identity, the loop stacking environment, neuroscience, the trauma-informed view, microhabits. Are there any specific tools people find helpful when putting this stuff into practice?
Definitely. We've touched on some implicitly. The habit tracker is a big one.
Right, the visual progress thing. Seeing the chain of checks can be really motivating.
Exactly. It makes progress tangible and leverages that desire for satisfaction. The 2-minute rule we mentioned is another great tool for just getting started.
Make it super easy to begin.
Using visual cues is part of environment design, putting your running shoes by the door, the vitamins next to the coffee maker, simple reminders,
Making the cue obvious.
and something perhaps less tangible but equally important, reflection prompts. Taking time to actually think about questions like, who do I want to become? What kind of person would achieve the goals I have? What daily habits would reinforce that identity? What systems currently support me and which ones sabotage me?
Stepping back and consciously connecting your habits to that bigger picture of identity we talked about earlier.
Yes. That reflection helps align your actions with your desired self, making the process feel more integrated and meaningful.
This has been incredibly insightful. Really breaks down the process in a way that feels, well, manageable. Not easy necessarily, but understandable and actionable.
That's the goal, I think. Demystifying change.
As we start to wrap up this deep dive, what's a key takeaway you'd want people to hold on to from our conversation?
I think it really comes back to remembering that lasting change isn't usually about those huge, dramatic, overnight transformations. It's almost always the result of small, consistent efforts, tiny actions repeated day after day that align with the person you aspire to be.
The accumulation effect.
Exactly. So focus on understanding your own habit loops, what triggers you, what you crave, how you respond, what rewards you seek. And then be intentional about designing your environment and your systems to support the positive changes you want to make.
And be patient with yourself in the process.
Right.
Especially remembering that trauma-informed piece.
Absolutely. Patience and self-compassion are key. Every small step forward, even if it feels insignificant at the time, is a victory. It's building that foundation, reinforcing that identity, one tiny action at a time. Don't underestimate the power of showing up consistently, even in small ways.
That is such a valuable reminder. So as you, our listener, go about your day, maybe take just a moment to consider, what's one small action, maybe inspired by something we talked about today, that you could realistically incorporate into your routine?
Doesn't have to be massive, just one small thing.
Yeah, what's one tiny step you could take consistently? Thank you so much for sharing all this expertise and walking us through these ideas. It's been fantastic.
My pleasure. It's important stuff.
And thank you, everyone listening, for joining us for this exploration into the psychology of lasting behavior change. We really hope this deep dive has offered some valuable insights, maybe sparked some new ideas for you. We definitely encourage you to keep reflecting on it.
Keep exploring.
We look forward to our next exploration together.